this up in my headphones, Charles.
Turning it up. Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today, because today we are going back into our character series, this time for a totally new character trope. We are talking about sidekicks that stole the show. That is Sidekicks. Very different from a previous episode you may remember called Side Characters that stole the show. This is Sidekicks that stole the show. And I cannot express to you how different those two terms are, right, Dylan?
Entirely different. It's not like we came up with this episode idea by nature of me at the tail end of our Side Characters that stole the show episode accidentally calling the episode Sidekicks that stole the show, and then us being like, oh yeah, sure, we could do that too.
That's right. It's not like that at all. And, side characters could be anybody, right?
Right.
As long as they're not the main
characters
or the protagonists, but pretty much anyone else, right?
Right.
There's a wide spectrum of who could be a side character, but
can't be in the core central group of
can't be in the main
but
cast.
Anyone else.
Yeah, but anyone else. But there's an art form to the sidekick, a very important character in fiction. Totally different from a side character, and I pulled it. Not even close. And so many new characters we're going to be talking about today because of that distinction. I mean, there's barely any overlapping characters between the two episodes.
I asked you to get rid of the one overlap,
but I insist on keeping it in, and we'll get into that as we stick along here. I think to start it off, I had this really quick definition from our favorite website, TV Tropes.
It's
up
my favorite website is theftfpodcast.com.
Oh, Dylan, that's a great website. And mine is maybe twitter.com/theftfpodcast with the number 1 at the end. That's another really great.
Will that take you to our account?
Yes, it will.
Nice. Oh, I also like that site, google.com. That has been helpful for me along the way.
Oh, man, Google's great. But we're not here to talk about Google, Dylan. We're here to talk about sidekicks. As defined by TV Tropes, these are the friends and helpers of the main hero. They can be almost any type of hero playing a secondary role. A normal character observing the action, or a plucky comic relief, sometimes all of them. Typically, they are a foil to the hero, and this is often underscored by their dramatically different appearance. That may not qualify for some of these, but it will be interesting to compare them here. And without further ado, guys, I gotta start us off right away with the obvious choice, perhaps the greatest sidekick in all of literary fiction, and that is Samwise Gamgee from The Lord of the Rings. Not surprising anyone. I mean, come on, Sam. You will know he is the sidekick for the main hero, Frodo. But Sam is kind of the one doing all of the heroics, if you ask me. He's the one who's out there supporting Frodo, kind of carrying him at times, getting them through some of the harder parts of their adventure. And, he's the one that kind of had to step up the most. He was maybe challenged the most, and he always, without complaining, without any kind of, jealousy or rivalry, he just supported Frodo constantly, and it's their friendship that is the core of Lord of the Rings, and Samwise Gamgee, such a critical part of that, and I just love the character. What can I say? He was in our second episode ever when we talk about our favorite characters in all of fantasy, and he's back again for sidekicks, man. Samwise Gamgee.
And when you're talking sidekicks, you're talking Samwise Gamgee in the fantasy genre. This is one of the most beloved characters in the entire genre, and for good reason. Just such an optimistic and
Yes.
resilient and incredible character that steps up when we need him most. What more could you want than
And
Samwise
such a
Gamgee,
selfless
Charles?
character as well. This is the kind of guy you'd want to be your sidekick on an adventure. You know, there's times where he
Yeah,
was like, "Oh, here, I have some extra water, Frodo. You can have some of mine." Sam doesn't have extra water. He's giving up a ration to support Frodo, and that's just a stand-up guy. Um, and he's he's very humble, and all he wants to do is go back to Rosie and start a family, and we're rooting for him the whole way. So another character, another couple sidekicks that we have to bring up just almost by default comes from the Harry Potter series, and that is Hermione and Ron. Uh, no surprise here. Harry Potter is one of the most popular works of fantasy ever, and Hermione and Ron are the quintessential sidekicks to our main hero, Harry Potter. What I like about Hermione, Ron, and Harry is this kind of found family dynamic that they have going on. Harry Potter's home situation growing up was not great, quite abusive,
not great.
actually. And when he finally gets whisked away to Hogwarts, he meets Ron and Hermione, and they very quickly form a strong bond, this found family thing that I just loved. And you watch them grow up together and go through their teenage years and take on all these great challenges. And it's their friendship and their trust in each other and their love for each other that gets them through a lot of their challenges and their adventure. And they all have different kind of tropes. Hermione's like the bookish one, and Ron is the solid number two guy, and it's a lot of fun. Those are great characters. I think a lot of people identify with certain character traits in Hermione and Ron, and I don't know. I just growing up there was like Harry Potter, Ron, and Hermione. Everyone knew who they were. It's just a great trio.
Something that's interesting to me about the Harry, Hermione, and Ron dynamic is that Harry is such in my opinion, a blank slate
Mm.
protagonist that doesn't have a ton of definable personality traits or characteristics. And that is juxtaposed against these two very vibrant characters in Hermione and Ron, both for very different reasons. Ron bit more of that plucky comic relief type,
Right.
I would say, and then Hermione falling into, like you said, Charles, that bookish, very
Intellectual.
smart, goody two
Yeah.
shoes, intellectual role, and they help round out that set of characters.
Mm.
And I think, you know, a big part of the success of the Harry Potter series comes from people's ability to almost self insert as the Harry role. I'm sure a lot of folks who grew up with this series almost felt like they were Harry meeting these awesome sidekicks in Hermione and
Mm.
Ron. And I think that makes them pretty cool sidekicks, that they captured the imagination of so many folks growing up who just wanted them to be their friends anyway. Sidekicks a little like doing them a little dirty. They're like a trio
Their
of three.
side.
It's like if you, me, and Derek, that the M crew, it was like, well, like maybe this is telling
Yeah,
me.
but
Is that how you
one of
think of us,
them is
Charles?
like the super famous person that everybody knows, and the other two are his friends. So
Well, I appreciate you think of me that way,
yeah,
Charles, but
never. Not
I'm
everyone's
telling
like,
you,
it's Dylan. Oh my goodness, the one who was chosen with the signature scar on his forehead. Everyone knows him.
I do have a scar on my eyebrow.
Yeah, I have
Anyway,
a scar on my
so
thumb. You don't see me bragging about it.
I feel like that's what you're doing. All right. Well, before this devolves any further, shall we move on to
Yes,
a character that I'm extremely excited to talk about,
bring
Charles?
it on. Yes.
This character is my favorite character in the Monstrous
Mm-hmm.
comics. That's by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic comic series that it balances these grimdark and steampunk and high fantasy elements. And the character that sticks out most for me is Little Fox, Kippa,
Mm.
who it's probably fair to frame her as Micah Halfwolf, the main character's sidekick. And something that is really interesting about Little Fox is that she is almost this beacon of hope and optimism, which, we talked about some of that with what Samwise has to offer. But, Samwise balances out Frodo, who's like still a pretty like nice and well-meaning dude, I think, who's
Right.
trying to be heroic. And Little Fox gets to be this contrast or foil, as you mentioned in the definition,
Yes.
I think, to our, I don't know if anti-hero is quite right for Micah, but certainly morally
Mm-hmm.
gray hero in Micah Halfwolf,
Right.
who is very willing to do what it takes to get what she needs to get done in a very dark feeling setting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Micah has a lot of this cynicism that has developed from how harsh the world around her is, while Little Fox is younger, also has seen a lot of this really harsh stuff that happens in the world around her, but it's never kept her from maintaining that hope
Mm-hmm.
and that optimism. And in that way, Little Fox, even though she's Micah's sidekick, I would say, is the heart and soul in a lot
Mm.
of ways of the
Well said.
monstrous comics and what makes them so great.
That's very well said. I mean, talk about a sidekick that steals the show here. Every time that we have Little Fox on the page, she's just so adorable, so eye catching, so charming. And she is kind of like the moral anchor for
Yeah.
Micah. And in a series that's otherwise way down on the grimdark end of things, Little Fox is the one that brings it into this hopeful, epic fantasy kind of role. And I think for that, she's earned a lot of love from you and I specifically, Dylan. And then talk about a sidekick that is dramatically different in appearance, right? From
Right.
Micah. And this is what Sana Takeda does really well with kind of the way she chooses to color. We have the benefit of this being a graphic novel, right? So we get to see these
Right.
illustrations from Sana Takeda, and she draws Little Fox so deliberately different from all the other characters, a lot less hard edges and angles, a lot more round, a lot softer, a lot brighter colors. She
Mm-hmm.
stands out right away, especially when she's like knee high to Micah, like pulling on her robe, like, "You're not gonna eat that person, are you?" And she's like, "I'm gonna try not to." So it's like that cute little dynamic there. That, I mean, talk about a foil both in like their actual
Right.
characters and then in their appearance as well. I think Little Fox is the best example on this whole list.
I could not agree more, Charles. And she really believes in Micah, and to have a sidekick that just so much supports and provides unconditional positive regard to the hero that they are backing up there. I mean, you can't do any better than Little Fox,
Mhm.
and
Well said.
I, yeah,
So,
I loved reading about Little
me
Fox so
too.
much.
If you haven't read Monstrous, go check that out.
Yeah,
Another graphic.
and
What were?
shout out to
Oh,
Beth Tabler at Beth Tabler.
yes.
Give her a follow.
Yes, for recommending Monstrous to us in the
Yes,
first place. So thank you for doing
right.
that, Beth Tabler.
Yeah, really
Um,
appreciate that.
Another graphic novel series in here, the other one that I managed to sneak onto this list, is one of my favorite works of fiction, just hard stop. And we said that about this series a bunch of times on the show so far. Of course, it is Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and illustrated by Fiona Staples. Saga is so epic. There's so many
Hmm.
characters. And for me, Lion Cat is the best in the sidekick role. And although you could say, Lion Cat is a sidekick to the Will, and the Will is not
Yes.
necessarily the main character, but he is one of the
Hmm.
main characters in this
Right.
epic, like 9 volume, 10 volume long saga, if you will. And,
Nailed it.
we love the Will as a character, and Lion Cat is his trusty sidekick. And Lion Cat is a giant cat that, if you're lying, he'll just go lying, like he's a lie detector.
I think Lion Cat is a female cat,
Lion Cat
if
is
I'm
female.
correct.
Did I say he? Lion Cat is a she, and Yeah, no, Lion Cat's great, and even like she's a lie detector not just for the wills, like anyone the will wants to kind of find out if they're lying or not, but she'll even point out when the will is lying as well, and that leads to fun moments where it's like, why don't you go in the ship for a while, Lion Cat? I'm trying to do some stuff here, and the will's not a guy you would traditionally see as having the kind of compassion to care for someone else, and a lot of his relationships with people are very interesting but not super healthy. But Lion Cat's this constant in his life, and it's really interesting to see how the will and the Lion Cat relate to each other and support each other, even though the whole world is kind of against them in that way. So it's always, to me, was kind of wholesome, and to watch the two of them interact was always a lot of fun. And just the idea of a lion cat is so clever and created such fun moments of dialogue and fun scenarios throughout Saga that had to put him on the list.
That's also well said, Charles. And I think that something that comes to mind here that I think works really well for Lion Cat and then had me reflect on Lil Fox too is that even though neither of those characters are human themselves, they both bring humanity in a lot of ways to the I don't know if hero is the right word for the whale, but the person that they are the sidekick to.
Right, right.
The leader is probably
Right,
the way
the
to put it.
recipient
Like
of said
the,
sidekickness.
right. So I think that Lion Cat brings out this side of this anti-hero, the Will, who's a bounty hunter, and I think I brought him up in our anti-heroes that stole our hearts
I think
episode.
so. Yeah, we love the Will,
Right.
so he's definitely been in the
Yeah,
character series before. A
for
lot of side
sure.
characters
And
have.
yeah, and when you have a character like the Will, who is someone who, when led astray without someone to ground them, things could go pretty awry fast. That's why you need one of these awesome side characters like Lion Cat to remind them to be compassionate, like you were saying, Charles, and to have something or someone to actually care about. And Lion Cat provides that so well for the Will, and we do get those funny moments. Like I know when Lion Cat does have to say lying about the Will, it's often this like very begrudging,
Yeah,
like
like her head's
feel
down
bad
and she's like
moment.
looking
Yeah,
kind of away, like a
it's like
pet does when it knows it's
lying.
in trouble, like lying. And
Yeah,
yeah,
like
it's so great. Lots of touching moments.
yeah,
And Lion Cat, like all Lion Cat can say is lying, but the amount of characterization and emotion that comes out of the illustrations of Fiona Staple are so good. Like Lion Cat's a very expressive character,
yes,
and wins over some hearts sometimes throughout Saga.
definitely.
So definitely check out Saga and keep an eye out for Lion Cat, guys. Great sidekick there. So I think we got to transition back to our more modern fantasy here with the first series that we ever buddy read on the show, the popular Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. And while there's no sidekick necessarily, that there's no character that fits the sidekick role definitively, there is the Kandra Osor, who becomes a sidekick for Vin in the second book, Wells of Ascension. And I think Osor is such a great example of the sidekick character. Kandra have the ability to shapeshift, and that creates some really interesting moments of espionage as we learn more about the Kandra. There's some interesting lore that really develops Vin's dynamic with Osor, and
Hmm.
it's kind of the driving force of the story in Wells of Ascension, and it's definitely the most interesting plot line to me in Wells of Ascension. And I was just totally blown away by the ending of that book and the relationship between Osor and Vin. It was such a huge force behind that. So I don't want to get into too much because I don't want to
Yep.
spoil anything. I'm trying to keep it as vague as possible. So all I will say is that look, Osor, like just the idea of a Kandra and then having Osor specifically be Vin's sidekick starting in Wells of Ascension, was super, super interesting. And I'm afraid
Right.
to say any more than that.
Yeah. And so much of Mistborn Era 1 focuses on these incredible plot twists uh, that Sanderson weaves in and out, and we're talking about book 2 of
Yes.
this incredible. Yeah, so there's so much more that we could say, but we don't want to keep it spoiler free. But I'm sure that any folks who've read Mistborn Era 1 know how awesome a
You guys know what we're
sidekick.
talking about, right,
Yeah,
guys? You
and
get it.
so, but someone that we can talk about Mistborn without having to worry too
Hmm.
much about spoilers is a sidekick that is near and dear to my heart, Charles, because this is the person of all the characters we've read. This is the person that most seems like you, Charles. This
This
is
is the
the
narrative you've
Charles.
been pushing for a very long time. I know who you're talking about. You may as well go out and say it.
This is Doxin from Mistborn. You know, every great Kelsier needs a Doxin. And behind the scenes, while Kelsier is being the face of the thieving crew, this charismatic guy out in front, that's a person that people want to communicate with and talk to and enjoy interacting with and all that kind of stuff. But a Kelsier is nothing, Charles, without a Dachshund behind the scenes running all of the logistics. And Dachshund is basically the bureaucrat behind Kelsier that keeps everything together in their thieving crew, and he might not quite steal the show
I
if we're
would
saying
say
if
I wouldn't
that's
go that
keeping
far
it,
either.
yeah, if we're keeping it strict, but he supports Kelster in a way that allows Kelster to be himself and do all those things, and really he needs Doxin.
Right.
So Charles, I mean, we have to chat Doxin.
Yeah,
That's your
I
guy.
appreciate you acknowledging the critical role that Doxin had in Mistborn,
Mm-hmm.
because I do feel like, there's characters that stole the show, and I would say Orsura has stolen the show a few times in Mistborn. Um,
Right.
Doxin never really steals the show for me, but you do have to take a step back and appreciate what he's done. Kelsier's promises everything, and Doxin delivers. Kelsier's like, we're
Ooh.
going to defeat the big bad, and then Doxin's like, everyone's cheering, and Doxin's in the back, like calculating, like, okay, well, we're gonna need this many swords, and we have this many troops here. They move them there, and they're gonna need to eat this kind of food for this long. He's the one that's making it happen, and I think Kelsier appreciates that about Doxin, but also relies on it super heavily, so never really brings it
Oh
up that
yeah.
much. So there is that kind of balance. So
Yeah.
gotta lift it up to Doxin. I'm a big Ham guy as well. Very great character there. I don't know if he's necessarily a sidekick like Doxin and Kelsier work
No.
side by side very directly, but gotta mention my man Ham as well, Pewter Burner.
Forget about it. Don't let Doxin don't do Doxin dirty,
I did the whole
Charles.
thing about
They-
Doxin. Love, like
That's your guy. Don't you
you.
relate? Isn't that basically me out on Twitter shouting, "We're going to read The Shadow of the Gods," and then you being like, "Okay, well, that's gonna require me shifting this on the
I do hand a
TBR."
lot of the logistical stuff when it comes to our reading schedule and our recording schedule, sure. But I also bring a lot of Kelsier elements to the show as well. So I like to think of myself as a
Right.
Kelsier Doxin Vin hybrid,
Yeah,
So
you're the full package.
Sanderson a little bit in there too. So it's got it all.
That I don't see, but
Uh,
let's.
Mistborn, guys,
Well,
check it out. Lots of great
definitely.
characters there. We got Osora and Doxin leading the sidekick charge. So keep an eye out for them as you're reading through Mistborn. Show them some love, guys. Big fans. Now
Yeah.
we are getting into another one of our great buddy read series. That is The Witcher, the multimedia cultural sensation. The Witcher, international as well, I should say. That by Andrei Sapkowski, and everyone knows Geralt. Geralt is indisputably the main character of The Witcher. He is The Witcher, and his sidekick is Dandelion. Dandelion is the bard character who pops up for many of Geralt's adventures, and they're best friends. And what's so interesting about that is the Witcher is very much like a solitary guy. He doesn't even like himself that much. He's very self-deprecating in a lot of ways. And anytime he goes on an adventure, it's always kind of, depressing, and he's always kind of bouncing like, oh, who's the monster? Ooh, doo, doo. And then he runs into his buddy Dandelion, and you can see the Witcher kind of put his guard down a little bit and allow himself to have some fun. He's making jokes, he's laughing. He's like, oh, it's good to see you, Dandelion. Like, the Witcher never says it's good to see you to anybody. So it's good to see, like, where Geralt and Dandelion get the chance to just be friends. They go fishing together. They, share stories. Dandelion's trying to build Geralt up by writing songs about him. Takes a lot of the marketing initiative for Geralt, and Dandelion is also this comic relief character, very plucky also, I would say, and which goes back to our TV tropes definition. And he's just fun to read. The Witcher could certainly use comic relief every once in a while, and Dandelion always delivers. Just a really great side character. Lots of fun.
Yeah, well said, Charles. I think that when it comes to the Witcher, I think the Dandelion Geralt relationship is so core to it in a way that, like, is different too between the show and the books. I find,
Yeah.
like, if you've only watched a show and you haven't read the books, then I think the books is kind of more all in on this. Like, look at us, it's me and you. We're sidekicks, and you're my
Right.
sidekick, and we're friends,
Right.
and we hang out together. While the show went a little bit more like their relationship is complex because the show is grittier and darker. But I think if you read the books, you'll see Dandelion a little bit more in that sidekick role than you might see him as, at least to this point in the show.
Right.
Is that fair to
I would say, like, they kind of played up Geralt being like, I don't need anyone following me around.
Yeah.
Like, leave me alone. And he does do that in the books too. And it's always funny because he says that, and then you can tell he would prefer Dandelion sticks around.
Right.
So he's like, I don't need you here. Like, why are you here? Go away. But he never actually, like, tries to get him to go away. He just says that because that's how he's comfortable expressing himself. But then, Dandelion kind of gets to his heart in a very, like, heartwarming kind of way, which I always like to see. It's
Yeah.
You can write
There's
the
no
stoic
real drama
character. Yeah, you can always write the stoic character, and it can get kind of boring. But the characters that kind of make their way into Geralt's heart is what makes The Witcher so good. You take, like, that 80s action hero, but then you actually get to kind of break through those tropes every once in a while with characters like Dandelion and Yennefer and Ciri. So, I mean, those relationships just make The Witcher so good. But Dandelion's the sidekick for sure.
Right. And the difference is there's no real drama in the relationship between Dandelion and Geralt in the book, but there seems to be some that they play on in the show. So, I don't know. I think it's the books where he sticks out in this sidekick role for me a little bit more. Either way, he fits into that side characters that stole the show trope in both the Netflix series and the books, and that's why he came up in that episode too. And I'm glad, Charles. I'm glad you fought to keep Dandelion in there.
Thank you.
That
was the one we mentioned at the top that I fought to keep in, was Dandelion. So you're welcome, Witcher fans. I fought for you.
Yes. And for me, choosing the lesser evil was just letting Charles get Dandelion.
Well said.
So let's keep it rolling, Charles. We've got a character that you added here that's from our current buddy read of the Wheel of Time. We're currently in the midst of reading The Dragon Reborn. We recently finished The Great Hunt and have released our buddy read episode on that already by now. And the sidekick that you list as stealing the show here is Lan.
Okay, well, to be fair, we didn't call
Time.
it stealing the show originally when I made this list. But
Lan does steal the show a
he
little
does,
bit. No,
and I really
you can do it.
wanted a Wheel of Time character on this list, and I was trying to think of like, do Matt or Perrin fall under this sidekick role? They
I think
really,
you could
they
have.
you could fight for it, but it's hard to talk about them without spoiling anything,
Right.
and even we're only in the middle of book 2 right now, so it's like I don't want to open that conversation. But I thought, Lan is a warder, and warders are basically sidekicks for Aes Sedai. They're like the
Yeah.
bodyguards that are magically linked to Aes Sedai, and they have like strong fighting abilities. But what makes Lan interesting to me is that he has this nobility background, right? He's like a former, I don't want to get too far into his background, but he's got a
Yeah.
lot of
I don't
he's
know
got a
what
lot
yours.
of royalty in his heritage, and that's not spoiling anything, I don't think. And the fact that he is a warder to an Aes Sedai adds a lot of intrigue to him. From the very beginning, he carries a very powerful presence, and he's seen right away as like, oh, this is the fighter character, right? He's the toughest guy here. He's the most hardened, and he can protect everybody. But then the relationships he starts to have with a lot of different characters, they stick out. And as a sidekick, I think he's particularly interesting, especially when you're talking about epic fantasy. I mean, Lan is so epic just in his nature. He's just a really cool sword fighter character. So of all the Wheel of Time, a book full of characters, Lan has just always been like the entertaining, noble hero guy, and he just thought he needed a spot on the list.
Oh, he definitely did, Charles. I didn't mean to rib you too much about that. I actually really like Lan, and I think that's something that's interesting about Lan when we think of him as a sidekick is he totally does fit into that definition in the way that he assists Moraine, given he's her warder,
Mm-hmm.
and he's clearly second fiddle to her in that kind of relationship, and he serves her in that way. But he's also got this element where even though he's a sidekick, he's clearly a natural born leader in
Yes, well said.
his characteristics. And that's what makes him stand out to me among the characters that we're listing here is even when these characters are folks that steal the show, they don't I don't think anyone else we've mentioned feels like a natural born leader in the way that Lan is, right? Like,
Well
we
said.
love Little Fox to death, but
She's not
Little
leading the
Fox
charge.
is not a natural. Yeah, I mean,
She probably
uh,
would, but
some. Yeah, if push came to shove, Lil Fox would have the courage, I think, to do that. But you don't look at Lil Fox and say, well, she should be in charge. And Lan has this bit about him when we meet him as a character where he could easily be a person who's in charge. And I'm not super far in the Wheel of Time, so I don't know where things do or don't go. But I don't know. He seems like the kind of guy who really could take charge in a way that few sidekicks could. And in that way, I'd say he does steal
that's
the
well
show.
said. And the way he collaborates with Moraine, who is the Aes Sedai of that he's pledged to serve.
Yes, and an Aes Sedai is like a wizard.
Right. And so he's
Yeah, it's
basically
more
magically
complicated,
linked to her as her warder, with her kind of protector, I guess, bodyguard kind of situation.
but
Because Moraine is also someone who's very independent and very much the leader. So the two of them together, it's like a power duo. And it's interesting to see
yeah.
the two of them out questing together. So very well said, Dylan, for sure. Very commanding presence from Lan.
hmm And I mean, another character that we grabbed from a buddy read that we really enjoyed, that it was a buddy read of the Poppy War series by R.F. Kwong. That's Rebecca Kwong. And it is Kittai, who is uh, the sidekick and definitely the foil to
Yes,
a main character
definitely.
that we think is an incredibly compelling character in Rin from the Poppy War. And Kittai is everything that Rin is not in a lot of ways, right? Like, he's very pragmatic, he's very measured, he's very careful, and he's also very intelligent. I think Rin is very intelligent in her own way
For
too,
sure.
but the way that it manifests itself for those two characters
Yeah.
differently is very interesting. While Kite has all those more pragmatic characteristics, Rin is completely rash. She is relentless. She is in no way careful.
Right.
She is willing to do whatever it takes to get what she wants done, and she's not going to give it a second thought. While Kitai will do a second thought, he'll give it a third thought, he'll give it a fourth thought, and so on and so on. And that's part of this, we grabbed that TV tropes definition that talks about being a
Hmm.
foil, and I think that Kitai helps balance out Rin, who is such a strong character in every sense of the word, and it's important to have someone like Kitai. Otherwise, who knows what Rin would get up to?
Very
Which she
well
does is
said.
kind of anyway. But
Right, right.
yeah,
And for me,
yeah.
what always stood out for me about Kite was that his unconditional love for Rin, basically.
Mm,
And Rin also, who has really interesting relationships with the people in her life. The healthiest one in a large margin is between her and
mm,
Kite. It's almost like the Ron, Hermione, Harry Potter kind of vibe. It's like this is almost like a found family situation between Kite and Rin as well. But Kite sees Rin as like a for who she is, this very powerful, strong leader, and Kite kind of worries for her when Rin doesn't necessarily want it, and it's that kind of love that, like you said, kind of becomes the foil for Rin, and it's super interesting to watch that progress throughout the trilogy. So, um, Kite brings a great perspective to Rin, kind of, reminds Rin certain times of like, hey, we're in this because like we're all friends and we love each other and all this other stuff. And Rin's like, oh yeah, 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 totally. So,
yeah,
and for that we love Kite.
yeah. A much needed presence in that
A level
story.
head
Just
every once in a while.
yeah, level
Yeah,
head, right?
and always the
And
logistical strategist guy as well.
yeah, and someone with a moral compass that is maybe a little more, a little
Noble, I
less,
guess.
yeah, a little less adjustable than Rin's can be at times. I'm
A
trying to,
little less
yeah,
Machiavellian, I guess.
right, quite a bit less Machiavellian than Rin is. Someone who, uh, Kitai has grown up with a lot more privilege than Rin has, and hasn't had to fight and scrape for everything in a way that has, I think, turned Rin way more uh, just relentless and Machiavellian than Kitai is. So it's good that she has him in that series to help balance her.
Agreed.
And another character that I want to make sure that we discuss here, Charles, comes from a series that you have not read
Oh
yet,
boy.
despite my constant pleadings, despite me pitching it twice and our friends pitching fantasy is something I want to add to our TBR. You know we're talking about the Gentleman Bastard series, and when it comes to sidekicks in the Gentleman Bastard series, you know we're talking about Jean Tannen. And you talk about found family, Charles. I think that you have a great found family in the Gentleman Bastard, uh, like thieving crew, and the clear, charismatic leader, as every good thieving crew needs to have, as we've learned from Mistborn, which you have read. eh,
Hmm.
The charismatic leader is none other than Locke Lamora, hence the lies of Locke Lamora. And he's this. Locke Lamora is this kind of like mastermind with a silver tongue and all these kind of things. But Jean is more of that Dachshund type here. He's
Okay.
more of the same kind of bit, this measured counterbalance to that charismatic person who's more upfront. And when Locke is coming up with all of these convoluted, wacky, zany schemes that only Locke Lamora would dare think up, Jean Tannen is the one keeping him grounded. And Charles, this is a duo that I'm sure you've seen many times come up. Whenever you start saying, like, what's the best friendship in fantasy? What's the best duo in fantasy? People will say over and over again, Locke Lamora and Jean Tannen. And that's for the way that these two are just such a fantastic counterbalance to their each other's characteristics, and they have fantastic banter and dialogue, and they're witty and they're funny and they're amazing, and they're a duo that I think you'd really love to read at some point, Charles.
Well,
Gentlemen Bastards by Scott Lynch.
Yes, I would love to read Gentlemen Bastards by Scott Lynch, and I can't stress enough to you, the listeners, how much it's Dylan's fault that this series has not been read, and how much ridicule he has launched a smear campaign against me on Twitter. Fantology's called me a falconer. I don't even know what that means, and I don't appreciate it, okay, Fantology? It's not my fault. Dylan's made me choose other books, but I've heard of Jean Tannen, and I've heard of Locke Lamora, and I've even recommended Gentlemen Bastards in recommendation series before, having never cracked the cover, because people have told me so much about it that I feel like I spiritually understand this series already. So
spiritually,
yes, I am very interested in reading Gentlemen Bastards and learning more about Jean Tannen. I don't know who he is, but he sounds like a really awesome sidekick.
Spiritually understand it.
I
read it, Charles.
Dude, I will. You got to pitch it properly. Don't put it against all these other series. Like...
People can see right through you, Charles. All this. Oh no, it's Dylan's fault that I declined to read it.
Oh yeah, okay.
People see right through that, Charles. But I cannot wait, Charles. I think that, who's to say who the sidekick is here? But when it comes to wonderful duos like Locke and John, I mean, I'd want no one by my side. Not saying you're the sidekick, but I'd want no one else by my side than you, Charles, on this wonderful journey that we are on together as a duo of equals.
Yeah, I see us more as a dynamic duo than maybe a main hero sidekick situation. But I appreciate the sentiment, Dylan. I get exactly what you're saying. When it comes to dynamic duos, I just feel so privileged and proud and happy to be part of this duo that is the Friends of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. I mean, talking about all these side characters really puts into perspective how
sidekicks. It is tradition to mess continues. Up the name at the end. Yeah. Side characters that stole the show. That's a good idea. We should do that. Oh, wait. Nope, did that.
For sidekicks, which are totally different than side characters, it's the same thing.
Close.
They're not the same thing at all. Talking about all these side characters and their relationships.
Nope.
Sidekicks and their relationships really puts into perspective, you know what, how great, how valuable friendship really truly is. So props to all these show-stealing sidekicks. And yeah, I don't know, man. I think I'm ready for that outro music.
I think you're more than ready, Charles.
All right, great episode, guys. Here we go. Thank you, everybody, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. Whether it's side characters or sidekicks, you gotta have the conversation over on Twitter. Let us know what your favorite characters are. That's at the FTF podcast with the number 1 at the end. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at the FTF podcast, and you can always, of course, send us an email at the FTF podcast at gmail.com. Dylan, if they are listening to the show, they like it, they want to support it even more than interacting on social media, and they just so happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what can they do?
toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just find the Friends Talking Fantasy page on the Apple Podcast app. Scroll down until you start seeing stars. Once you're seeing stars, we'd ideally love if you clicked 5 of those stars. If you did have a little bit of extra time and you want to help us out even more, then you can leave us a review, and that helps people find our podcast and all that good stuff. But you know what? I mean, just listening is more than enough. We appreciate you so much for doing that. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.